Hi, I'm Ashlyn. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a white female with short brown hair. I'm wearing a orange sweater and a black shirt. I'm sitting in front of a white wall with a white door.
Hi, my name is Xianna Rodriguez, and I'm a Latina female. I have medium length brown wavy hair, and I'm wearing a blue sweater with a black and white collared shirt underneath. And my background, I have some photos in the background and a bookshelf as well. I forgot to mention my pronouns as well. My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
My name is Ralph Black, and I'm a old white guy with white hair. I'm wearing a sweatshirt from the Guinness Brewery in Ireland, and I think my background is some mountains from Yosemite Valley.
The first question that we have for you is, how did you meet Ed Roberts?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure. It was a few years ago. I think that I first met him at a conference in 1976. The White House hosted a conference for advocates in the disability community at one of the big hotels in Los Angeles down by the airport there. And Ed was one of the main speakers at the event, and I was a student at the time and came and attended the event, and I think that was where I first met him.
So the next question is, what role did Ed play in your life, and how did he influence you?
Well, I guess probably primarily as a role model for how to become an advocate and get things done in terms of changing disability policy and law. One of the effects other than that he had on me personally was that at the time, as I said, when I met him, I was living in Long Beach and kind of trying to decide what I was going to do after college and so forth. And I ended up, as a result of talking with him, I was involved in a project at that time. We had an organization called the Disabled Students Coalition, and we were trying to get funding for programs to serve students with disabilities in all of the colleges and universities and get the state legislature to fund that. And a couple of us talked to Ed about the possibility of setting up an office for the DSC in Sacramento so that we could better orchestrate our advocacy campaign with the legislature, and we were interested in seeing if we could get a grant from the Department of Rehab to make that happen. And it ended up that we applied for the grant, but we didn't get it. But by that time, I had already sort of configured my life around the idea of coming to Sacramento, which I ultimately did, and that's where I've lived since 1979 and had my career and so forth here in working in state government. So he was certainly a part of the influences that pushed me in that direction.
Perfect. Could you describe for us your impressions of Ed and what his personality was like?
Well, he was very energetic, forceful, personality. Anytime he would come into a room, he would kind of dominate the discussion. And he was very self-assured, always seemed to know exactly what he wanted, and you know, had a plan in place for how to get it. And he was also funny, entertaining kind of guy. He knew how to use humor to make his point and get people's attention and so forth.
So, if anything, what wisdom did Ed pass on to you?
I guess probably just sort of the idea that if there's something you want to accomplish, don't just sit around and think about it, or, worry about what could go wrong or whatever. Don't be intimidated. Just, put one foot in front of the other and get out there and get started and make it happen. He was a very positive person, and I think sort of him, gave me the idea that you could accomplish what you wanted to if you were thoughtful and had a plan and just get started and do it.
And what was Ed's legacy that he left, kind of more broadly?
Well, I guess I would say a couple of things. First of all, sort of one of the first things that he did before he was famous was to organize students at UC Berkeley and get the office for disabled students set up there. And there were similar efforts going on at other campuses around the state. I was involved at Long Beach State doing similar things, but I think UC Berkeley was one of the first, and it kind of set a template for what a lot of the rest of us were doing in other locations around the state, which ultimately led to the establishment of programs at all of the public colleges and universities in California. And nowadays, even a lot of the private institutions have similar kinds of programs. So he was certainly a pioneer in access to education. Of course, he's well known for his role as one of the founders of the Independent Living Center there in Berkeley, and of the disability community or disability rights movement nationally and even internationally through the work that he did at the World Institute on Disability. And then the other thing that I think about is the change that he made kind of in reshaping the Department of Rehabilitation when he became director in, I guess it was 1974, when Governor Brown appointed him as director. And up until that time, the department really thought of itself as, an organization of non-disabled people who provided services to help those poor disabled folks. And, there's still, an element of the department's mission, which is direct service, provision to people with disabilities. But when Ed became director, he kind of shifted the idea of what the department should be and added functions like the Independent Living Center program, and there were other programs that he started at that time that focused more on the general disability movement and trying to make the department into a focal point for disability policy in state government, and the idea that people with disabilities ought to lead that department. And with one exception, all of the directors since that time have been people with disabilities who've been involved in the disability community and were active leaders in the disability rights movement. And a lot of the senior executives there have been also. So, there certainly is always room for improvement, but the department is definitely a much more friendly place and much more oriented towards support of the disability community than would have been the case 50 years ago before Ed got there.
If you could you share a story or anecdote about Ed that gives us kind of an idea of who he was?
Well, I remember one of the first times that I actually visited him in his office at Department of Rehab in Sacramento. I came in with my girlfriend at the time, and she said, Ed was late, which wasn't unusual. But anyway, we were in his office waiting for him, and she saw a poster that he had on the wall, which was a framed copy of the executive order that President Roosevelt had signed in 1941 or 42 to order the internment of the Japanese on the West Coast. And just about that, and she was reading it to me, and about that time, Ed came rolling in, and so we asked him, well, why do you have this poster here on your wall? And he said, well, I really always liked President Roosevelt and, thought he was a great leader. But when I learned about the issues related to the Japanese internment and so forth, I always thought that was a important lesson, that even people who are great leaders can make mistakes. And I wanted to have this poster in my office to remind me about that, so that I try to avoid doing the same kind of things myself. And I thought that was a really, interesting attitude for him to have, and important to keep in mind.
So the next question is, when was the moment that you had realized that Ed was a game changer?
Was probably, not too long after he was appointed as rehab director. I was on campus at Long Beach State, and a woman who was the head of the Disabled Students Organization there, Brenda Primo, or herself later became rehab director. She came running into the office one morning and said, "Oh my God, you won't believe this. We, just got this, I don't know, it was a memo or newspaper article or whatever she had, that, the governor had appointed Ed to this position." And so we were all like, whoa, check this out. And of course, that was the first time that anybody with a significant disability had been appointed as a director of a major state agency, and probably one of the first people to serve in that capacity in any state. And so everybody was really excited about that, and I think it was clear to me right from the start that that was a major development in the disability rights movement.
And then if you could you give us 3 words that you would use to describe Ed, please?
Well, enthusiastic. Like I said, he always, was very energetic, and when he spoke, and organize people. Another one would be persuasive. He could really have a way of presenting ideas and proposals that was very convincing and helped get people moving in the direction that he wanted them to go. And then I guess I would say big picture. He was not the kind of guy who would sit down and write out details of how something was supposed to happen. He was, the idea man, and he would dream up things and then, find other people to implement them if he could, get agreement to move forward with it. And, sometimes that meant that things didn't exactly turn out the way that he originally envisioned, but he was always the one that came up with the ideas.
If you have any, would you mind sharing a funny story or memory that you have of Ed?
Well, I thought of this one, probably nowadays it wouldn't be quite as much of a surprise as it was in those days. And but this was, I don't know, probably sometime in the late 70s, early 80s, something like that. And I was at a conference and Ed was speaking. And this was after, I already knew him relatively well. And he left the ballroom or whatever where he was speaking, and most of the people had left. And I was with a friend and we were walking out, one of the last ones to leave the room. And she said, "Oh my gosh, somebody left their bag here in the back of the room. We should see, what it is." And we went back and looked. She said, "Oh, I recognize this is Ed's, satchel or whatever that he always had with him. We better take it to him." So we went looking for him, and somebody said, "Oh, he's just getting ready to leave. You better hurry." So we rushed out and found him getting into his van in the parking lot. And we said, "Here, you left your bag in the conference room." And he goes, "Oh, holy smoke, that's my pot stash. I got to have that." So we we kind of knew that he was into that sort of thing, but the idea that he would have brought it with him to the conference and left it in the hotel was kind of funny. Probably, I don't know, you have to be judicious about how you use that anecdote, but that was the one story I could think of.
That's a good story. But the fact that he would leave it behind in the conference room really got me. That's pretty funny. So why is it that he chose to become an advocate?
Well, I don't know. I mean, as I said, I didn't know him in his early years, but I'm not sure that that's really what it was. It probably wasn't a matter that he chose to become an advocate. It was the fact that, he didn't have any other way to get what he needed. I think, I knew his mother and she was, a strong advocate and probably, taught him a lot of, what he needed to know originally as a young man and student to advocate for his needs. But basically, probably from what I understand, the sort of the threshold thing that really helped him become an advocate was that when he wanted to go to college at UC Berkeley, he couldn't live on his own, and the university didn't have any kind of housing in the dorms that was set up for somebody with a severe disability like his. So yeah, I think he and his mother helped badger the university into setting up a wing at the university hospital where they had the equipment and facilities, and they were able to house him and then later on a handful of other students with severe disabilities there. And as far as I know, I think that was probably the first advocacy project that he embarked on. But of course, that was out of necessity to have a place to live so he could go to school.
Thank you so much for sharing. So how did Ed find or create his support system within the disability community?
Well, of course, as I said, that first support system was the Cal Hospital housing situation that he set up. And then he went on to help set up the Disabled Students Office at the university there. And then from there to set up the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley. And all of those were efforts to set up a support system first for himself, but also for other people in the community.
So these are going to be our last two questions for you, unless we think of anything else. But they're both kind of looking forward into the future and right now for youth and people who are coming into advocacy. So this question is, what should youth be advocating for to carry on Ed's legacy?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues that nowadays are more prominent on the agenda in terms of what advocacy efforts are going on, trying to deal with various benefit programs and, the scope of the ADA and so forth. But two of the things that Ed really was committed to that I think deserve more attention and that youth could certainly work on that would help carry forth his legacy are expanding employment opportunities. He as rehab director and later through WID and other activities always believed that one of the most important things for people with disabilities was to have jobs and not just be passive recipients of public benefits. And that's an area that sadly we still haven't made much progress on. And then sort of a related issue is involvement in higher education. It seems like from a lot of the young people that I've interacted with recently, many of them are, if they go to college, maybe they get a bachelor's degree or something and then try to go off into the world of work. And that's fine. But there are a lot of opportunities that are only available to people who have advanced degrees. So one of the things I always try to encourage people who might have an interest in a higher level professional career is to consider going on to graduate school and to try to open up more opportunities in those advanced levels of higher education.
Once again, thank you so much for sharing all of these answers with us, and thank you so much for your time today. So our final question is, what would be Ed's dream for the disability community today?
Well, I think one of the things that Ed really wanted to do in his lifetime, and made some efforts in that direction, but certainly more work needs to be done, is really trying to create a more united cross-disability movement. And, certainly in those days, in the 60s and 70s, most of the organizations that existed that were working on disability rights issues were disability specific. The blind groups and the deaf groups and the groups for people with physical disabilities and so forth. And what Ed really sought to do here in California and on a national, worldwide basis was to get people to work across those boundaries and come together and look at issues that affect all people with disabilities, and to coordinate our advocacy efforts. And we've been successful when we've done that in getting the ADA enacted and making other changes, but all too often, even now, we're fragmented. Organizations squabble among themselves, or we just have different agendas and don't pull together as often as we should to have a more coordinated approach to our advocacy. And then the other thing, I guess I would say that I think Ed would have hoped that we would have achieved by now is a lot more influence in the political system. He was one of the people who, knew the governor and members of the legislature and later, presidents and so forth. And, he didn't do it as his lifetime, but he always encouraged people to get involved in political efforts. And I think that he would have hoped or expected that by now we'd have, lots of people with disabilities in elected offices and in positions of power in government. And we don't really have that very much. And I think that he would hope that we would make more progress on that.